Well, it's a pleasure to introduce Monika Pessler. She, of course, needs no introduction in this context. She's the director of the Sigmund Freud Museum in Vienna. She has been since 2014. She studied art history and curation in general for the museum and exhibition context at Danube University Krems, the Department for Arts and Cultural Studies. And she's worked in many contexts as a curator. She's curated exhibitions, or at least worked in conjunction with the Museum of Modern Art Klagenfurt, as well as been involved in the Hysterische Herbst Contemporary Art Festival. And she served as the director of the Austrian Friedrich and Lillian Kiesler private foundation from 2003 to 2013. In addition to other wide-ranging exhibition activities, she's also curated many exhibitions here at the institution, at the Sigmund Freud Museum, including Surreal, Imagining New Realities, 2022, and The Uncanny, Sigmund Freud in Art, 2024, which I think is currently on view. So please, let's welcome Monika Pessler.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome from my side, and thank you for the introduction. I'm happy to welcome you all and thank all the participants of our conference to the annual theme, Absence. I don't speak to you today as the director of the Freud Museum, more as the curator and art historian. So absence is not only significant for the development of psychoanalytical theory, as we have already heard and will hear again, but it is also intrinsic to its birthplace. We already heard that. Today, here at Berggasse 19, numerous key stimuli that familiarize us with Freud's former workplace are linked to the presence of absence. This is closely related to the history of the house and its inhabitants, like the Freud family themselves. 90% of their neighbors were Jewish and were forced to flee from Nazi terror in 1938, and or were deported, tortured, murdered in the years thereafter. What remains in today's Sigmund Freud Museum is a gutted place of remembrance, as Lydia Marinelli once phrased it. Today I would like to tell you about the absence in the birthplace of psychoanalysis, and the relationship between image and text is somewhat unequal, and you may not always find a direct connection between the displayed material and my statements. This is because the photographs do not serve as illustrations. Rather, their presentation constitutes a parallel event that will accompany my curatorial narrative and will only on some occasions be linked to what you will be hearing. And I would like to express my heartfelt gratitude to the photographer Hertha Hurnaus for her images and for granting her permission to show you this as yet unpublished material here today. Despite the reversal of meaning between text and image, the spoken word might address individual photographs to tell you about the story of their creation or speak about the artistic intentions behind them. I will also take the liberty of making loose editions based on fragments of memory, Erinnerungsresten, selected quotes from correspondence, for instance. In these cases, the spoken word will illustrate the image. As you can tell, I'm trying to draw your attention to the correlation between expression in images and words, which is significant in psychoanalysis. Just think of dream work, as well as in the curatorial practice of the Sigmund Freud Museum. Therefore, I would like to invite you to give preference to the images in the next half hour. As visual artistic documents, these photographs speak for themselves. Their selection and arrangement, however, will guide your gaze, and you will become a witness to my or a process of appropriation that seeks to explore the essence of this place, to create adequate ways to communicate it. My first tour of Berggasse 19 with Hertha took place as early as the spring of 2020. It focused on capturing the characteristic features of Freud's former workplace in images for our new collection catalogue. The museum's renovation had only recently been completed, and it had not yet been furnished. At the time, the place felt almost untouched, had it not been for the visible traces of the past, exposed historical layers of wall and ceiling paint and coverings, as well as time-worn windows and doors whose signs of use had intentionally been left visible, and that had only been restored where absolutely necessary. In a lively discussion with words and gestures, but also while quietly walking through the building, we contemplated whether it would be possible to capture the latently tangible yet ephemeral atmosphere of the place, despite or perhaps thanks to its emptiness. But let me come back again to our today's topic, the absence that is intrinsic to Berggasse 19, also as a bitter consequence of past events. After all, this location is not only the birthplace of psychoanalysis, but also serves as a reminder of the Freud family's expulsion, the persecution and murder of Freud's sisters, neighbors, colleagues and friends, as well as of the house's function from the spring of 1939, when the Nazis established so-called Sammelwohnungen, or collective housing, to better organize the deportation of Jewish Austrians to Nazi extermination camps. For the cultural side of the Sigmund Freud Museum and its redesign in 2020, this absence represented a meaningful point of reference. Even in the years before, internal and external experts had already been invited to reflect on how Freud's life and cultural work could be conveyed and how the history of the place could be presented if what is most striking is what can no longer be seen. Even so, all considerations regarding the history of the origins and influence of psychoanalysis always led to the house itself and its obvious emptiness. The reconstruction of a world of yesterday, as it had shaped people's life before World War II, seemed entirely and literally off track. For such an endeavor would amount to the denial of Freud's history and consequently also our own. Not only when looking back, also when attempting to fathom the potential of psychoanalysis for upcoming social political developments, we seem inexorably drawn to connections with the place where psychoanalysis originated. Indeed, our steadily increasing and ever younger international audience reflects a growing interest in psychoanalysis that is not merely the result of historical curiosity. This year too, at least 130,000 visitors from over 130 countries will, very much in Freud's spirit, subject their own and current standards of civilization to scrutiny by asking themselves, quote, what are the influences to which the evolution of our culture owes its origin? How did it arise and what determined its course? It's a quote of civilization and its discontent, as I'm sure you know. And this circumstance that this place, like a pilgrimage site, attracts worldwide interest makes us question once again which notions and yearnings are associated with it, namely, which spirit prevails in this place and how this genius loci is expressed. As you know, the term genius loci is generally not so easy to grasp and is increasingly being discussed in art and architecture. While in Roman mythology it referred to the protective deity of a house that affected both the inhabitants and the place itself, today genius loci primarily describes the characteristic of a place, the quality of the emotions that a specific place is able to evoke. Accordingly, the photographer also focuses on the characteristics of the rooms and places. Thus, even the image of the wall where the analyst's couch once stood turns into a condensed narrative. In the photograph, the clearly defined surfaces of the floor, the wall, and the recesses fuse into a geometry that emphasizes the presence of absence through its abstract symbolism. Similar to the manifestations of images in dreams, which are also marked by condensations and displacements. Light and shadow add further nuances here that seem to both highlight and obscure the distinctive features. Art and architecture often face the challenge of giving shape to the aura of a place by adding something concrete to its spiritual dimensions. What can be perceived with our senses enhances the ephemeral feeling and thus makes it easier to be experienced. This is much like the task Hertha Hurnaus took on in her poetic conception, which stages these concrete manifestations through photography. Today, while walking through the Sigmund Freud Museum, a lot more than just a visual sense is engaged. The space can be experienced in a way that might even make it possible to visit the museum in the company of those ghosts to which Siri Hustvedt attributes such great importance in the catalogue of the permanent exhibition. Regarding psychoanalysis and the role of the Sigmund Freud Museum, the American philosopher and writer states, quote, "We shouldn't forget that the story began there. It began with the idea that a particular kind of dialogue between two people can have healing effects. And ideas are like ghosts that travel invisibly from person to person, from one era to another, across oceans and language." And in light of the current social-political climate, Hustvedt ends her greeting with an appeal. "I am here to say we must care for our ghosts. We must protect them or they will disappear altogether in a din of shouting, of fury and violence. The past matters, it matters now." In the birthplace of psychoanalysis, the act of locating one's identity in one's own history is subject to a continuous comparison of what used to be there with what remains or is still visible. And in this process, the external sensory stimuli are mostly reduced to just a few original objects or even fragments. While compiling this presentation, this factor also led me to a fundamental principle that is essential to me as a curator. The content that is to be conveyed requires an appropriate form of its presentation. This is why our exhibitions are also emphasize the relationship between content and presentation, in complete contrast to the white cube concept, as you know, in which the exhibits are detached from their surroundings and presented independently. In the contextual exhibition practice I advocate at the Sigmund Freud Museum, content and form are understood as interdependent factors. This approach proves particularly effective when it comes to presenting Freud's workplace in such a way that its underlying aspects become visible. As is the case for every intentional design, the visualizations, even though they are often only partial or fragmentary, provide the constitutive elements in the creation of meaning, like in concept art. The process of perception, or rather the process of becoming aware, initiated by the curator, is deliberately reminiscent of Freud's description of the latent and the manifest dream content, because the latter, the manifest, also takes shape, becomes an image in the dream, and offers the possibility of interpreting what lies behind it. Thus, our ways of thinking and perceiving as exhibition designers also approximate to the psychoanalytic in order to provide patients visited with sufficient material for their mental reconstructions during the reception process. The wallpaper door in the wall of Freud's treatment room, which was only reopened 10 years ago, could also be viewed as such an instrument of imagination. In the past, it allowed patients a discreet exit after their sessions. The fact that today we can again enter Freud's treatment room from the waiting room through a double door and exit through a much smaller door makes an essential aspect of Freud's practice visible, ensuring intimacy and confidentiality in psychoanalytic treatment. Hurnaus also pays special attention to this entry and exit situation. Like in photographic multiple exposures, the two adjoining door openings appear as units arranged in series. With the emphasis on the vertical orientation, the doors dissect the room and grant the gaps an equivalent status of direct presence. The impressions of something hidden conveyed by the photographic close-up can be seen as a symbol of the secrets revealed in the intimacy of this room during Freud's time. The exit from this passageway, which led to the exit of the practice, is also captured by Hurnaus. In this picture, an imprint left by the installation of a hook on the bast material of the coat rack comes into focus. Once again, it marks what has been lost and is now absent. Here again, the staged visibility of what is absent does not obscure or blur. On the contrary, it sharpens the focus on past events and fates that have remained perceptible to this day as individual and collective experiences of loss. And on closer inspection, there is also the empty space that appears to the left just before the window. A small crack in the originally preserved ground glass suggests that the Art Nouveau hook was in the way when the window was opened and was removed shortly after the renovation that took place when Freud's practice was relocated from the intermediate floor of the house to the mezzanine in 1906. The foyer was simple, with bars inside on the door, a protection against burglary, itself not an unusual feature in middle-class Viennese homes, recalled Edmund Engelmann, who in May 1938 became the very first photographer to document Freud's practice and apartment for posterity. Engelmann wanted to see things as Freud saw them with his own eyes, to create a lasting and authentic impression of the birthplace of psychoanalysis. In a nearly identical approach, Hertha Hurnaus has documented the wear and tear on the original furniture, thus encouraging us to envision what Engelmann once authentically and actually had before his very eyes. In this comparative interplay, we today depend on completing the image of Freud's former workplace in our mind's eye. Accordingly, the guiding principle envisioning in order to see, which has accompanied the redesign of the Freud Museum since the very beginning is tied in with this perception process. The practical implementation of this principle also necessitated the use of the so-called archaeological metaphor that Freud drew upon to illustrate his research methods. Just as the founder of psychoanalysis traced repressed events that had been pushed into the unconscious, our restorers also removed the more recent material, layer by layer, to uncover what hidden beneath. In Anna Freud's bedroom, according to restorer Fabio Berggasse, quote, "The remains of the in-house telephone line have been preserved. The decision to showcase this indirect find once again highlights the desire to allow the house itself to tell its story, to reveal the hidden human legacies in the architecture, and thus make the past tangible again." Regarding the constructions in analysis, Freud wrote in 1937, "The work of construction, or if it is preferred, of reconstruction, resembles to a great extent on archaeological excavation of some dwelling place that has been destroyed and buried. The two processes are in fact identical. But just as the archaeologist reconstructs the mural decorations and paintings from the remains found in the debris, so does the analyst proceed when he draws his inferences from the fragments of the memories, from the associations, and from the behavior of the subject of the analysis. Both of them have an undisputed right to reconstruct by means of supplementing and combining the surviving remains. As early as in the 1890s, Freud discussed the process of perception and remembering with Wilhelm Fliess. His reflections began with the, quote, "assumption that our psyche mechanism has come into being by a process of stratification. The material present in the form of memory traces being subjected from time to time to a rearrangement in accordance with fresh circumstances, to a retranscription." Unquote. Freud postulates that every perception is followed by at least 3 registrations in the psyche. These are defined by different levels of consciousness. The path to becoming conscious, which Freud here still argues for from a neurological point of view, is characterized by different translation processes. If the impression results in a feeling of aversion, they are repressed, a psychological process that can be viewed as a normal defense mechanism, as you know. And by contrast, the pathological defense mechanism arises when the respective levels of translation do not take place. The aversion linked to the perception can thus return again and again in an uninhibited manner. The memory then behaves like something current, he wrote. Impressions of exposed remains, marked voids, or a glimpse into the vestibule of the Freudian family apartment on the mezzanine sometimes also evoke uncanny feelings. The uncanny, as Freud notes in his text from 1919, quote, "leads back to something long known to us, once very familiar, and relates less to the foreign than to a familiar thing that has undergone repression and then emerged from it. This particular feeling of anxiety is thus one that has been estranged only by the process of repression." In a photograph of the entrance area of the private apartment, the voyeuristic element, which is always associated with secrecy or something hidden, becomes clearly evident. A peephole in the swinging door of the cloakroom made it possible to observe the activities in the vestibule without being seen. The view of this hermetically closed door will at the same time emphasizing the perspective into the entrance era, and places us in the role of observers. From the vestibule of the private apartment, we pass through doors with etched window panes into the family living room, located on the side of the apartment facing the Berggasse. Since Freud used a giant room, which would later become Minna Salon, as both a library and treatment room until the mid of the 1880s, this room also served as a waiting room for patients. When they moved in 1891, Freud told Minna, his sister-in-law, about the limited number of patients at the newly opened practice in the apartment. Quote, "The consulting hour offers plenty of opportunity for writing letters just now. I consider hanging up my photograph in the waiting room with the inscription Enfant Souris. Unfortunately, it wouldn't find any admirers there." On the opposite side, based in light, is the smoking room, which was reserved for social and family gatherings in the early decades. The adjoining veranda still offers a view of the leafy trees in the backyard, which are reflected in the doors and window panes at this time of year and day. The greenish reflections create a charming contrast to the blue and red color of the historical ceiling painting. In later years, this representational space also served to accommodate foreign guests who belonged to Freud's innermost psychoanalytic cycle, including the poet and psychoanalyst Lou Andreas Salome, as well as Freud's colleagues Karl Abraham from Berlin and Sandor Ferenczi from Budapest. In the room in which Lou stayed, we will house early in January, on one after the other, Abraham and Ferenczi, who shall lecture to our Americans. Americans refers to candidates from the United States who were undergoing training analysis with Freud. Just how closely Freud's professional practice was intertwined with his private experience is also stated by his grandson, Anton Walter. Ordinary emperors and kings have only one court. Grandfather had two. The first court was the psychoanalytic one. The second court belonged to grandfather's private life. You do not have to be a Galileo to notice that this one revolved around grandfather too. Insights and views created by the numerous connecting doors and windows are repeatedly showcased in the portraits of the rooms presented here. Whereas Martha and Sigmund's bedroom remains mysteriously dim, the one behind it, belonging to his sister-in-law, is filled with light that is reflected from the smooth surfaces of the doors and pushes into the foreground. Many years before, in 1986, Freud painted a detailed picture of their future joint home in his love letters to Martha, 1886. However, Martha had several objections to make in her reply to Freud's enthusiastic descriptions. "Your description of the apartment today, my love, was really not enjoyable for me. A man who has been engaged for 4 years and forgets the bedroom when listing the rooms. Since I, however, am not accustomed to sleeping in the bathtub, I have no choice but to take a nice little room close to you, but it will still be lonely for me, and for you, not much different. Why don't you say bedroom instead of living room? After all, the waiting room can serve as our living room during the hours outside of consultations. Oh, you are really not useful at all, and I will think it over very carefully until the 17th. I still have time." Unquote. As mentioned, Freud did indeed initially practice as he had envisioned in the private rooms in Berggasse in his library. After the birth of their second daughter Sophie in 1893, this even became his bedroom for a few weeks. And he wrote, "For the entire week I felt as if someone had removed one of my springs. For I am sleeping in the library and can conduct the nicest studies on strange dreams." Freud wrote in April of that year, "Thus we learn not only about the family circumstances at that time, but also about the first notes on dream research, which would later lead to the founding document of psychoanalysis, the interpretation of dreams." As early as 1886, after Minna's fiancé and Freud's close friend Ignaz Schönberg died of tuberculosis, Freud wrote to his sister-in-law, quote, "You will soon have forgotten the grievance his memory still evokes, and then you will tell yourself that you lost a good, noble, and affectionate man without it being his or your fault. I have one thing to ask of you. Live for a while modestly with the two of us who are now closest to you, and think about the long life we still have ahead of us and the strange things worth experiencing that can still happen to our little circle." Unquote. And that was precisely what happened. In 1896, Minna moved in permanently with her sister and brother-in-law, and her room at Berggasse 19 was located directly behind the bedroom after Freud's. Minna would help Martha with household chores, assist in caring for the children, and became, as you know, an important companion for Freud. Beloved old man. We are increasingly entering the stage of midsummer here, and the noise of the Berggasse unfolds even at night, when the various caretakers hold conversations across the street, seconded by their dogs. But the apartment is still quite bearable. We have prepared it for you, and you will find it relatively cool in your rooms during your hopefully very short stay in Vienna. A letter from Minna to her, to Freud. So, just like us, Hertha Hurnaus was captivated by the idea that the rooms at the birthplace of psychoanalysis stored its history and genesis along with those of its founder. Thus, also for the photographer, making the atmosphere on site visible became the primary concern, and her artistic focus remained mainly on the structured interplay of light and dark. For the light that can describe the genius loci, while constantly changing throughout the day and the seasons, has always been present. It is what remains. Thank you for your attention.
Well, thank you very much. I'm not sure if this is working. I think we have a good 20 minutes for conversation. So are there any initial questions? Great.
Thank you very much, Monika. I have no any question. I'm just very much thankful to you because there are several times I hear the word the birthplace, and for me the birthplace is always empty, and we always fill it up nachträglich. So I'm very thankful to you and to Daniela and to Jean, of course, for keeping the emptiness and for not filling it up completely with imagery. And I think it's the most important ethics nowadays to keep ethical attitude to the absence and to the emptiness. And as you mentioned, not to expel ghosts, but to keep them. And so far as Derrida was mentioned several times, to use his vocabulary to be hospital to the ghosts, not to expel them. And for me, your presentation and photography is incredible, absolutely incredible to my mind. So I'm just wanted to thank you for the wonderful speech and for keeping the ghosts of the birthplace of psychoanalysis. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So, related to the photographs, Hertha Hurnaus, for all of you who do not know, is a very wonderful and in the meantime also famous photographer for architecture. I think after Spiludini, she's the most important photographer for architecture in Austria. And it was a success that luck that we were lucky to come together to find images that present the emptiness and the absence. So it's not easy to make this visible in striking pictures. And therefore I decided not to tell what I always tell again and again about the concepts and more to illustrate with words the photographs. Yeah.
Thank you, Monica. My talk tomorrow also is a lot about doorways and doors and thresholds. I was really struck by what you said. I have a question about the photography, which was wonderful, I thought. Except for this last image, all the doors are flung wide open. The doors are wide open, and presumably psychoanalysis has to do with opening the doorway between the conscious and the unconscious and so on. This last image has a closed door behind the... I wondered if you could reflect on closed doors and open doors. There must be there are closed doors right here so we can have silence. I noticed the restrooms have closed doors. There's probably a staff only area with a closed door. How do you think about or curate, and surely for Freud, there were closed doors, right? Private spaces that were enforced by way of the closing of the doors. So the photographs are an idealization, I think, of a world of open doors. But I wonder how you might also mark the necessary closure of the door between the spaces.
Thank you very much for this question. It's very interesting to hear such a comment because I never reflected about if the doors, I never saw that most of them are open. But what I realized is that most of the time it's Hertha always showed the open door, and especially this exit situation, and you have the closed door of the practice opposite of you. And so it's the situation when you leave a room. It's a very a situation as you will experience if you leave after the museum's tour, the museum. And of course, the symbolic of doors, closed and open, are so obvious and used in so many artworks too, as a symbolic form. And I'm sure it's a symbol in psychoanalysis and interpretation of dreams too. What means a closed door, what means an open door. But the thing is, it is really characteristic also for the museum, most of the museums, but especially this museum, because you have to ring the door as a performative act, and then you will be able to enter a Freud's former practice or apartment. And this act of entering and ringing and open the door by yourself, and of course, with it sounds very simple, but not always the simple things are the worst. So this act of opening a door, closing it, and also be confused because of all the doors. You can go in, you can go out, you don't know where you are. This labyrinthic feeling a lot of our visitors have has something to do with psychoanalytic treatment and human psyche. It's all, everything becomes a metaphor, visible symbol. And it's a way on a not very obvious level to communicate or bring knowledge to our visitors. So, eine Stimmung, so they come into a mood. I think that helps the perception. Also reading the text, so the atmosphere around is impossible. Not impossible, important. Sorry, Sigmund Freud.
There was one little change actually now that you talk about doors, because before the reconstruction, the pushing the button took actually much longer. Somebody actually had to open it, and the entrance to the right apartment was not open. Now both doors are open, and I think it's quite reflective of this time. It is easier to get in.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for the presentation. I was thinking a lot about the final part of the presentation when you refer to Martha and Minna in terms of rooms, right? So on the one hand, speaking about the intimacy of Freud's life and home, you have a quasi missing marital room, right? There is this kind of complaint in the wife saying, where is my real room, right? But it's always also,
Where's the bedroom?
where's the bedroom?
Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like, but there's something missing somehow, right? But on the other hand, there is the extra room for someone who's been very close to Freud, even physically in terms of like the space of the house. So I was wondering whether you wanted to, elaborate on that. Like, this seems to be almost like I'm simplifying as a philosopher, I'm schematizing. So a missing room is compensated by an extra room, but there is no
for another
high number.
Another wife. Yeah, of course. No. So I think this perspective makes it very clear. So what is interesting is that this picture with this light in the back that pushes into the foreground through the reflections. It's interesting that the light come from Minna's room. I think you referred to that picture and the text. And that the sleeping room of Martha and Freud is the room in front of this light room on the right side of the picture is dimmed and darker. So what is interesting, I think, is that first, Martha complaining that she has not her room. She's not complaining that she has not a room for her own. She's complaining that there's not a bedroom for the couple. But the intimacy, and it's always a question, of course, but the intimacy between Martha, Minna, and Freud being so close together was not an unusual situation in these days. It's only our today's idea of intimacy and sexuality and then the marriage of and is always very connected with that, and it was not the fact, and it was not the case in these times. And what I think what is beautiful in this photograph, and also the other one, is that you can see that it is one room. and they had to do a lot with each other. So Martha kicked Freud out because she need her peace and quietness after the birth of Sophie for weeks. And he started to make notes on his dreams. And Minna stayed with her to bring her the baby at night and so on and so forth, and to help her with her care work for the children. So
one more thing. Wasn't it so that Minna had to go through the bedroom of Martha and Sigmund to go to the bathroom,
yes,
right? So in a way, she had nightly needs forced into a primal scene situation, you know, as she was going to the bathroom.
but you know, in these days you had not
The
to
pot.
leave your room for
You
these
had the
needs.
pot.
Yes,
No,
remember that.
I forgot.
So I think what is interesting, we see it in the, we can see it and feel it in the passageway. Here, this double entrance and exit, and you see through into the passageway, into the walk-through room, where the patients can leave their session secretly. And what did I want to say? Yeah, and in this space was the sleeping room of Paula Fichtel, the housemaid. And when Freud finished his work, he went there, washed his hands, and Martha, Paula, was lying on her bed beside, and he ignored her. And she ignored her boss, washing his hands and going to the apartment. So this kind of, and Timothy was on a small scale, spacely, and
Yeah, it's really crazy to see these Hurnaus pictures. And Monika, I wanted to ask you to go back to the last photograph, to come back to your question, Leonard, because what you see here on the last photograph is the entrance to both apartments. You see the closed door is the practice and the open door is the family apartment. And so you cannot go through two doors at the same moment. Therefore, one is closed. And this is exactly the situation every visitor has to decide. Do I start on the left side or the right side? We don't say go there or there. This was really a crucial part for developing the exhibition, and that our visitors take their own choice. For all of you, you have not seen the museum yet. Tomorrow we will have a longer break between 1 and 2:30, so you get a free ticket for walking around, as you say, the labyrinthic space which we have downstairs. But this is I think one door must be closed and the other open, because you cannot have this, you cannot go to both apartments at the same time. You have to take it. You have to make a
Yeah.
choice and a decision. Yeah. Except in the, yeah.
There are many doors.
Yeah. Otherwise, most doors are open. And if you are in the veranda where we saw the beautiful spot, you see from the veranda until the Berggasse. So you go. This is really new, because before everything was closed, and now you can see from the yard to the street, which is crazy. Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Just thank you so much, Monika. I was really amazed during your talk, extremely poetic talk, by physicality of the space you explained. And this physicality leads me back actually to the 17th century, because, you know, now you have an exhibition of Rembrandt and Samuel van Hoogstraat, and that physicality was expressed and represented actually in half closed, half open doors, and the space that's half of empty, even with empty shoes. And this somehow, I guess, so somehow connected the psychoanalysis and this birthplace with psychoanalysis become possible because the 17th century thoughts that kind of in the so-called the abstract space was fulfilled with thoughts in humanity in a way. Could you?
Thank you very much, Olga, because that is, I think, a crucial point. It's had a lot to do with wonderful explanation also for the approach, the artistic approach of Hertha Hurnaus, because the sections she decided to take and the perspectives is a very, you can find a lot of art historian and like paintings from the 17th century. Yeah. I think
Maybe
very
I mean,
close.
yeah. I mean, maybe just I mean, we're nearing the end here, but just like if I could have a final question or observation that I think relates both to the question that Lorenzo posed and then Daniela, you know, about this idea that, you know, which actually I think is confirmed by the decisions, the compositional decisions of Hurnaus, namely that I was sort of struck by the idea that you all, I mean, in almost every image you have this kind of tremendous compositional, you know, I mean, a striking compositional structure, but then there's an asymmetry introduced that often the crack of a door introduces perspectively in terms of the position of the camera, a kind of moment of asymmetry. So you can't, you know, in other words, you can't close the additional room and the absent room. And likewise, you can't have the door both open and closed. That there's a sort of a tension to the asymmetry of the composition of the photos itself. So it seems like she inscribes this problematic within the sort of the way she frames these photographs. So maybe just more of an observation, but.
Great, and nothing to add to this. Nothing to add to this from my point of view.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, on that note, I think
Thank you
yes
for the last comment.
yes,
That was
thank-
very